Species unite.
Species unite.
Our bodies have co-evolved over millennia with the help of all these other beautiful animal species, with the millions of species of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live on our bodies and inside our bodies.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. We have a favor to ask. If you liked today's episode and you have a spare minute, could you please rate and review Species Unite on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts? It really helps people to find the show. This conversation is with Parneet Pal. It's a little bit different than what we usually do at Species Unite. We are still talking about an animal, but this time we're talking about the human animal. Parneet is a Harvard and Columbia trained physician working at the intersection of leadership, health, and sustainability. She's an educator and a science communicator. Her work focuses on optimizing human health and its impact on business leadership and planetary well-being. Parneet, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Beth. I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you.
So most people that come on Species Unite, everybody actually up until this very moment, come on the show to either talk about non-human animals or solutions for non-human animals. But it always stems back to like their peril, like what's happening. You are my very first guest who's on the show to talk about human animals. In a lot of ways, I don't find it much different because we're in just as much peril. There are so many crises happening like across the board for humans, as most of us know. But since this is your work, it's really, really cool that we're doing this. Let's just start with like your background a little bit and how you went from the path to becoming a doctor to the path of actually, I really want to focus on prevention.
Yeah, no, and it was, when I look back on it, I can kind of draw straight lines and make a neat little story out of it. But, when I was going through it, I really had to take it one step at a time. I grew up in India. That's where I went to medical school. I was surrounded by a very integrative mentality around well-being. Just it stems from the way that Indian culture and the ancient science of Ayurveda talks about life and health. My parents practiced meditation and yoga on a daily basis. So I was surrounded by all these memes of what it meant to be healthy. And then I went to medical school and was indoctrinated into a very Western model of healthcare, which I also absolutely loved. I'm a science geek. I love to know what's happening in the body. I want to understand that better. But throughout this journey, I was noticing how I was feeling and also the impact that my work was having, both as a student and as a medical resident. And what I noticed was that, first of all, even though I loved learning about the human body, I'm in awe of the intelligence and wisdom of our physiology. And I loved reading and communicating that information. But being in clinic and clinical practice and the way that medicine was being practiced, both in India, but also then in North America, that didn't quite sit right with me. And I felt that that was not the optimal way that I wanted to have impact in the world and use my knowledge. It was also not making me very happy. I don't think that was my true calling or path in life, clinical practice. But I was really being drawn to prevention. And when I looked at the statistics, it just made a lot of sense to me because, most of our modern lifestyle-related diseases are preventable. 80 to 90% of them are preventable. This is where most of our healthcare dollars, not just in the Western world, but more and more globally go to. But very little attention is paid to these things, how we eat, how we sleep, how we manage our stress and emotions. I was fascinated by the fact that we have so much power in our hands to influence our health and how we show up in the world. And so, yeah, that sort of became a focal point for me.
When you look at these things, and you see that there's all these crises. There's individual, there's crises in the workplace right now, and of course, we're in an enormous planetary crisis. Will you talk about the connection between the three and how you look at it from your perspective in order to do this work?
I think my focus right now on this connection between personal and planetary health really comes from a frustration when I look at the conversation between the impacts of climate and sustainability and health. So currently, I find that this conversation is very unidirectional. It's just one faceted. We are part of a system, right? So humans, we're not siloed entities. And by that virtue, we have an equal opportunity for our personal health to impact in the other direction, climate and sustainability. So that's what I'm really interested in. And I really want to flip the narrative and flip the paradigm and have us thinking about how can we make our human health and biology an asset and not a liability in the sustainability conversation. And to do that, we really need to understand that we can't outperform our biology. So that's a huge concept that I've come to realize, and I'll give you sort of an example of that. Even right now, as we're having this conversation, the way that both of us are sitting, for example, or the amount of focus that we're bringing into this conversation, or how creative we feel, or how trusting or collaborative that we feel, the decisions that we're going to make in each and every moment, all of them are a result of the quality and the quantity of our moment to moment cellular energy. And if that quality and quantity of the energy that our mitochondria, which are the parts of our cell that convert food into energy, if that's not optimized, that's when we run into problems. And the problems that I've noted that we run into is the quality of our moment-to-moment decision making, which is very different from our conscious intentions. And this is sort of a unique quality of the human animal, is that our moment-to-moment behaviors are really dependent on these automatic habitual loops in our brain. And so most of the time we're running on autopilot. And so the only way that we can shift and move from this autopilot, unconscious way of thinking into a more intentional, conscious way of making decisions in every moment that are good for us, that are good for our businesses, that are good for our planet, is for us to pay attention to our biology and upgrade the quantity and quality of that moment-to-moment cellular energy. So, for example, I don't know how many hours of sleep did you get last night, Beth?
I'm pretty good at this. I got about 7.5.
Oh,
yeah.
excellent. Now, but I know on the days, like for example, the research clearly shows that if we slept less than 7 hours, we may not realize it. We might think we're still, kind of on and performing at our best. But actually, our cognitive performance is equal to that of somebody whose blood alcohol level is 0.05%, which in the US is sort of, you would be legally drunk. And so I was just thinking about, think about all the times that we show up at work, that we show up in our relationships and our conversations with other folks at this level of cognitive performance. But then it kind of gets worse. So like if we're sleep deprived, we have this, there's a feature called feedback blunting that happens. So even though we are presented with data, we struggle to make that connections in our brain that help us connect that data in an effective way to make good decisions. So our decision making is affected in that manner as well. And then it makes us more emotionally labile. So we've all had that experience where we've not slept well, and then we tend to be a little bit edgy or on edge, and we snap at people, and so it affects our emotional regulation as well. So the list goes on, and that's just one example of how unconsciously, if we don't pay attention to our biology and our physiology and how we're taking care of ourselves, it has a very direct impact on the quality of our moment-to-moment decision making.
Let's talk about individuals first, because for the most part, we don't really take that great care of ourselves, and we know what to do, and we know all these things that would make life like a lot better or a lot easier. And it's really, really hard to develop like the discipline or the, just the habits individually. So aside from sleep, will you talk about a few other things that people aren't, how many people end up with these diseases that come from lifestyle that it really is a choice on some level, right? That you end up with diabetes, heart disease. I'm not saying this in a judgy way at all. I'm judging the entire human race, that we know that this is going to give us diabetes, but it's so hard to care until it's there. And that's kind of what's happening with the planet as well. It's really hard for people to really care until it's in their face. And even when it's in a lot of people's faces, it's still hard. For individuals though, aside from sleep, like what else would make individuals' lives much better, right? And less sick?
In addition to sleep, how we manage our stress is really important. What we eat is very, very important. And in fact, what we eat in our food systems play again very beautifully into this connection between personal and planetary health, but also because it's literally the fuel that our mitochondria are using, and that inform the quantity and quality of that moment to moment energy that we're creating in our cells. Movement is also really important. And there's a really robust body of research that points to these lifestyle factors, right? So are you getting at least 150 minutes of movement in a week? That's like the bare minimum. Hopefully you're getting more than that. Are you getting the 7 to 9 hours of sleep? Do you have techniques that you use to navigate your difficult emotions and stress in meaningful ways? And that includes the quality of our relationships and the community that we build around us, which is really important for long-term longevity and health. And then, of course, from a food perspective, study after study is showing that plant-rich diets are the diets that are important, not just from a health perspective, but from a planetary health perspective as well. So again, we can dig into the details of any of these, but that's kind of the basic structure. And I think one principle that we need to keep in mind that might be helpful is that our body is an ecosystem. We are part of nature. And if you look at all the other species, and both animal species, but also plants species, we're designed to live in a narrow zone of energy balance. It's called homeostasis. And the two kind of boundaries of that balance is growth and repair mechanisms, right? So we need to grow every day, but we also need to repair and restore and regenerate every day. And humans, unfortunately, and every other species on the planet gets this, does it, is as Janine Benyus famously said, life creates conditions that are conducive for life. But human beings, unfortunately, along the way, we got too creative and, we developed too many of our cognitive capacities, and we've kind of forgotten that principle. And so we lean on our biases always towards more growth. So it's just like more, more, more. How can I consume more? How can I grow more? How can I eat more? How can I, everything is, how can I make my business grow more? It's all about this growth. And we've forgotten about the other aspect, that repair and regeneration and restorative aspect. So when it comes to our lifestyle, then just a question for us to ask is, when it comes to sleep or movement or stress or what I'm eating, how is this influencing not just my capacity to grow, but how is it influencing my capacity to repair and regenerate?
Why do you think we resist all this so much as humans?
That's $1 million question. I think our environment plays a huge part of that. And this is, one of the things that we know from the science of behavior change is that it's not just our personal motivations and good intentions that are important. Those are key. But who and what we surround ourselves with is paramount to any kind of change that we make or not make. And so I think we've just fallen into a rut as a society and as humans of, this post-industrial kind of, a very kind of siloed, mechanistic, linear, reductionistic way of thinking, where for our businesses and how we think about our societies and for nations, we've gotten so fixated on just a very narrow set of metrics and defining success with those metrics. And then that becomes the culture, right? And we take them for granted. We think that those are the truths that we need to build our life on. So I think that also kind of, I think now is a good time for us as a species to just pause, stop running for a bit and just pause for a bit and think about what are these subliminal messages in the culture that we're creating and passing on to the next generation. What is the impact that that's having, and how can we start to move away and question some of these messages around what success means, what does it mean to lead a healthy life, and how do we relate to one another? And I think when that shifts in our environment, then that opens up a little bit more room for us to think differently, which I think is missing right now.
Yeah, I do too. Say someone comes to you or you're talking to someone and they say, look, I'm a mess in all of these levels. I eat like crap. I never get enough sleep. I work too much. I don't do any exercise, all of the things. Where would you tell someone to even start if none of this is kind of in their repertoire?
Great question. So I would start small. Start with something that's really easy to do. Something. So here, there's another part of our biology or the way that our brain works that might be helpful. So we have our conscious brain that is involved in about 5% of our decision making, whereas most of that 95% of our decision making, as we mentioned, comes from our subconscious centers in the brain. And in a moment of stress, all of our good conscious intentions go out the window, and we always come back to those subconscious autopilot programming. And what does the subconscious brain care about? Just three things. It cares about our safety. Am I safe? It cares about reward. Am I getting, whether it's a financial or emotional reward of my actions in the present moment? And it cares about connection. So if those three needs are not being met, then that's where we hit up against this dissonance between what we want to do in the world and what we actually end up doing. So the first step for somebody who's really struggling with trying to make these changes is, first of all, to reassure them that don't worry, we're going to start small, and we're going to take it one step at a time, so you can relax a little bit. And then the second thing is to say, what does your subconscious brain really care about? So what are the things in your life that you associate with staying safe, being rewarded, and feeling connected? And in other words, these are questions around values and self-identity. And once you can pinpoint those and have somebody say, for example, family is really important to me. Okay, great. That gives me a sense of connection and a reward that contributes to my feeling of safety. Great. So that's like a primary value for that person. So in a moment of stress, they won't care what their physician told them to do about their health. But if they tie their intention and motivation for taking care of their health to the fact that they will be able to spend more time with their family and make that their primary motivation. I want to live long so that I can live to play with my grandkids and influence, their lives in the world. So when that becomes the motivation, then you're more likely to get up in the morning and do that little thing for your health, more than your physician telling you and rattling off a whole bunch of statistics around how bad this is going to be for your health. And to your point, it's really fascinating. There was a study that was done in folks who suffered a heart attack, and really, they almost died, and they're getting, they survive it. They're in the hospital getting rehabbed, and then they get discharged, and they get told these are all the things that you need to do to make sure that you stay alive. And even though they've come to that point of near death, it's only 25% of people who actually follow through on those on those instructions. I mean, this is how crazy the human animal is. I think just trying to understand our brain and our biology is a good first step to trying to overcome.
Yeah, and then we kind of know what we're up against when you look at it that way, because change is hard. For me, when I started meditating, I was forced. My sister-in-law, who I was working with at the time, every day we started with 20 minutes and every day we ended with 20 minutes. And then it became a practice. I don't know if I would have been so good if she didn't really honestly make me, but it worked. This is like 10 years ago. Once I started meditating super consistently, and it was a like real part of my daily life, and it still is, but only once a day. What happened to me was like slowly, without even trying, like things I smoked back then, and I quit smoking without a fight. I was just like, what am I doing? After like a 20-year pack a day habit, I literally just like looked at it and it didn't want it anymore. Also, when I went vegan, I'd been vegetarian for decades. And I was like, I can't believe I'm not vegan. That's so weird. None of this was like a fight, because I think just sitting, watching how you operate every day, all of a sudden it's like veils kept coming off of all these kind of armor and protection. And then it definitely made me want to do better in the world, and like in little incremental ways, right? It didn't make me a saint by any means. It just made me want to be better at anything, at connection, at being with people. It made everything else not feel like change. It felt like it was just part of this path. I don't know if it's different for everybody, but it felt like with the mindfulness, having like that experience made a lot of other change really not simple, but just like doable and not even really that questionable.
I love that you brought that up, and there's so much in there. You basically hit on so many important aspects of behavior change. So the first thing was you meditated because it was your sister-in-law next to you who was making you do that. So this is, again, like the people and the things that we surround ourselves with have a huge impact on our behavior, more than our own motivations. So if we want to make change, switch up the community, switch up the people that you hang out with. That's probably going to be the strongest way and the most powerful way that you will start to make those changes. So join a community, join a club, whatever the new habit you might want to be creating. The second thing that you pointed out was the fact that once you started practicing mindfulness, it made everything else easier. That's a principle in behavior change around building a keystone habit, right? So mindfulness became your keystone habit. That was like your foundational habit that then had a ripple effect into every other area of your life. And mindfulness can be a keystone habit for a lot of us, but for some other folks, it might be exercise. Some other folks, it might be volunteering, but something that you do on a consistent basis that starts to build that level of self-awareness, where you start to have those moments of pause where you can reflect on, wait a second, when I do this, this is a consequence of that action. And actually, I don't like that consequence. And is there something else? Do I have another option? And then that's when you start to move away from those habitual loops of thinking. And then the other thing that you brought up is just the power of mindfulness itself. So again, we have so much research on the science and benefits of practicing mindfulness, which include, just very broadly, 3 different networks in the brain that get strengthened. And the first network is our attention networks. So this means that the more we practice, the better our ability to focus, to concentrate on one thing, to be fully present, both in our lives. And that's why you started having those aha moments, right? Because you were able to just pause and take some time to focus on the one thing yourself, for example, in that moment. The second network that gets strengthened in the brain with mindfulness practice is our emotional regulation networks. Huge. What practice allows you to do is to reset very quickly. So you don't kind of you get better and better at not taking the bait of what's happening with your emotional landscape, and you sort of metabolize your emotions quickly. And then the third network in the brain that's strengthened with mindfulness practice is our pro-social networks. So our ability to empathize, to be compassionate, to help others. I think our ability to trust each other, to collaborate with each other is so important right now if we are to meet our climate and sustainability goals.
Do you think, for instance, in the workplace, like you would feel like it would be a no-brainer that pretty much every corporation on the planet and every organization would have mindfulness into the workday? It would be a part of the culture, because we know that productivity would be higher, sick days would be less. Like there's a lot of data on this, yet there's still a ton of resistance, right? Because humans go straight to, oh my God, what a waste of time. Do that on your own. But we know this would like be such a game changer in the workplace. And so is the resistance the same thing as like the individual resistance?
I think so. I think, yeah, it's the same kind of edge of human behavior that we're hitting up against in the workplace as well. But at the same time, I think there's a huge shift, and I think, post COVID, I think organizations are realizing that, after the Great Resignation and the fact that, Gen Z and the folks want to feel a sense of belonging at work, but they also want to feel a sense of connection and impact with the work that they're doing. And the younger generation now is leaving. They're just leaving if this is not sort of in the culture of the organization. So I think this has become an added incentive, a newer incentive for organizations and leaders to consider mindfulness and compassion practices. And I think the way that we talk about this and present it to organizations also matters. So again, coming back to, like, what does their subconscious brain care about?
Let's talk about food a little bit. For food, because we've really gone, I mean, in all of these things, we've really gone off the rails in terms of how we eat, in the sense of even in the past 50 years, how we eat, right? And what that's done to us as physical beings, and sickness and mentally, and kind of where we need to go and how that parallels with the planet.
Okay, so there's a lot there. A couple of observations there. So one is, when we look at all the stats around food systems, one aspect is that food systems, which is how we produce, how we transport, how we consume food, is, as you know very well, one of the leading contributors to climate change. Biodiversity loss, food systems contribute to 70% of that loss on land, 50% on water, 80% of deforestation, about a third of greenhouse gas emissions. Food systems are the largest source of water pollution. So how we grow and produce and transport food is really, really screwing up how we're taking care of the planet. And then on the flip side, what's happening to our diet? Well, our current diet, which has leaned towards more and more processed and junk foods and emphasis on animal food intake and industrial farming and industrial agricultural practices, health-wise, 1 in 3 of us are overweight or obese. 1 in 12 are malnourished or undernourished in some way. And our diet is actually the leading cause of death and disease globally, because our current diets fuel a process at the cellular level called inflammation. And inflammation is simply a natural immune response in our bodies to any kind of toxin or injury. And it's an important process. It's a protective process in the short run. So, for example, if I hurt my hand, if there's a scratch, we need that inflammation because we need the immune system to heal that wound. But when our body is constantly bombarded, and through the food that we eat as one stressor, then we develop a state of this chronic inflammation in our cells. And that state of chronic inflammation is the starting ground for everything from obesity to diabetes to heart disease to autoimmune disorders, and even things that we know, mood disorders like depression and anxiety, are linked to this inflammation in the cells. So a huge impact there. And then when we look at the impact of our food systems on our microbiome, our bodies, we are not silos. Our bodies have co-evolved over millennia with the help of all these other beautiful animal species, with the millions of species of bacteria, fungi, viruses that live on our bodies and inside our bodies, right? So that's what the microbiome is. It's this huge community. We have twice as many microbial cells than human cells on our body. They're such grateful creatures because, in turn, for us giving them a place to hang out and hosting them, they do so much for us. So we've incorporated their genetic information into so many of our metabolic reactions in the body that we literally wouldn't be able to survive every single day without these microbiota. And so the more diverse our microbiome can be, the healthier we are, because this is how we have evolved and this is what our metabolic systems are attuned to. So when it comes to food and our diet, one of the strongest levers that we can pull to optimize our health is to make sure that we're eating a diet that nurtures a diversity of this microbiome, right? So we want more and more species of these microbiota in our body. And how do we do that? Well, first, we stop doing the things that are extinguishing or getting rid of the good bacteria. And animal foods are top of that list. And junk foods and processed foods are top of that list. And what happens when we consume these foods is the metabolic byproducts that they produce increase that inflammation in the cells, right? Which we're trying to avoid because we want to be healthy. And the way that you do that is by eating plant-rich foods, by eating high-fiber foods, by eating fermented foods. And again, if you look at all the ancient cultures in the world, they had this intuitive knowledge because they were living in sync with the environment so much more than us. And so these were staples in all these ancient cultural diets. So just making sure that we focus on that. Just try to think of, in a week, can I eat 30, that's 30, different plant foods? And what the research shows is that when we do that, our microbiome sings. And when our microbiome sings, because our body is an ecosystem, right? So one thing, there's always a domino effect and a complex effect on all other systems. So if you make just this one change, like literally, if you just make this one change in your diet, you're going to sleep better. Because the microbiome affects not just your digestion, it affects your immune system, which means you're going to be less sick. You're going to protect yourself from cancer. You're going to protect yourself from heart disease. You'll be able to control your weight better. And because there's a gut-brain axis, your moods are going to be better. Your cravings for the lousy foods is going to go down. I mean, I could go on and on. Like microbial medicine is a huge frontier of medicine. So, but just on a very practical level, I think in terms of our lifestyle and when we eat these plant-rich foods, and I think this is sort of coming back to that connection between personal and planetary health. What are you saying? You're kind of voting with the food that you eat, and so you are influencing the way that food is produced and consumed and transported. You're influencing, hopefully, policies that start to shift away from like this very unhealthy ways of the industrial farming, industrial agriculture, and raising of animals. And you're enriching the quality of the soil, and the soil has a microbiome, just like our gut has a microbiome. So lots of different connections. And so, if there's one thing that you could do, if you had to choose, that would be good for yourself and for the planet, I would say just have a second look at what's on your plate and choose a planetary diet.
I have a question. Well, I have a comment and a question. My comment is, now that I'm going to think of my microbiome as a community for the rest of my life, it makes me want to treat it a lot better. But my question is, when you say 30 plant-rich foods, do you mean 30 different kinds of plants or just 30 plant servings?
Oh, 30 different. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes. But it could be everything. It could be vegetables, fruits, grains, herbs, spices, all of those count.
Okay. That makes sense.
It's not as difficult as it seems like a huge figure, but actually when you start putting things together, you can do it very easily in the course of a week.
Right. And that makes the community happy. The microbiome.
That makes the community. Yeah.
No, it's true though. It's true. But hearing them as a community totally makes me want to treat the microbiome better. Because you're thinking of it as these, like, how you're describing it, all these living things that are keeping you going.
It's life. It's just life that you're hosting and that you're part of. It's this beautiful planetary process that we're all a part of. There's so much beauty in the way that our bodies have been designed. So in that respect, we're just like every other animal, right? Species. And so I think my encouragement to the listeners would be to just get curious about how your body operates, to get curious about your biology. I would love for everyone to fall in love with their biology Because once you understand how these mechanisms work and how complex and beautiful they are, it's becomes that much easier to live aligned with these systems. Our bodies have been designed for us to work in concert with our circadian rhythm, for example, the rhythms of nature. So if we can align our lifestyle to these rhythms, that's when we produce the best quantity and quality of mitochondrial energy.
And do you think that's what's happened in the last, I don't know, 100 years or so, that we've just kind of lost connection, like connection to our bodies, connection to what we eat, to each other? It's ripple effect on all of the above of what you're talking about, like from individual to planet. A lot of it just comes from a lack of connection. You probably can speak better to this than I, but I feel like there is just this hunger to get it back right now that hasn't really been present in a while. People do want to connect again, and they do want, like, there's a lot, and like in our mindfulness world, the work we're doing, people are much more open to it now than they were 10 years ago, like shockingly more. You don't have to do a disclaimer before you say something to somebody, kind of the same as being vegan. Like there's a lot more room for it.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Up until this point, and unfortunately, this is another kind of um, not so great health statistic, is that the rates of loneliness and disconnection, as you may have heard, are also worsening. And I think that's also feeding this desire for connection, but just in a very the hard fact is that a lot of people, especially in Western cultures, are reporting that they don't have anyone, not even one person in their life that they can turn to, when they need them. So whether it's to celebrate something or when something goes wrong in their lives. I mean, imagine, and I think the statistic is something around 1 in 4 folks in North America don't have a single person in their lives that they can turn to when they really need somebody. And what happens again, and I will always come back to the biology, because once you understand that, then you don't have to convince yourself of something when you understand how something works. So in our bodies, disconnection. So imagine you were like, hundreds of thousands of years ago, you were this hunter-gatherer in the savannah, and we lived in tribes. That's how we protected ourselves, and we managed to protect ourselves from predators and other danger. Now imagine you were part of like you lost your tribe for whatever reason, and you were just like this lone ranger out in the jungle. That was a terrible position to be in, because you were weak. The lion would probably get you. You would probably not be able to find the food that you needed to find. And so our biology made sure that if we were ever in that kind of situation, it would trigger the fight or flight stress response in huge ways. And when we're in that state of kind of being separated from our tribe, in our body, it turns on those genes and that immune process of inflammation again. And it makes us withdrawn because we want to protect ourselves from danger. But at the same time, it makes us really anxious because it disturbs our sleep. We stay awake because we have to keep looking out for danger to make sure that the tiger doesn't get us. So when we extrapolate all of that to our 21st century and take a look at somebody who might have like a gazillion Facebook friends, but doesn't have a real, even one meaningful relationship, they essentially just like that lone ranger out in the wild. And they're feeling anxious. They're not able to sleep. Their cellular inflammation is really high, and they might feel depressed. This is what's happening to a lot of, unfortunately, even our younger generation who might be very technologically savvy, but perhaps haven't invested that much time in building these in-person, real relationships. But once you understand, okay, this is what's happening in my body, and the reason that I'm feeling so lousy is because I'm not fulfilling that need for connection, then again, that becomes a starting point for, okay, what can I do? And I think that's why we're sort of noticing this hunger for connection everywhere. Right. Because I think, post-COVID, it just sort of helped us shift, helped us connect to that sense of disconnection that was always lingering,
I had no idea the physical impacts of loneliness. And I'm sure in a lot of ways, loneliness begets more loneliness. If it's affecting you like that physically, the last thing you want to do is go connect because you're depressed, you're shut down, you haven't slept.
Beth, you've basically highlighted one of the research papers, which is that loneliness begets loneliness. It's a vicious cycle. I think one of the takeaways for us, in our workplaces or as individuals and communities, is to look out for that. Is to notice that when somebody is being standoffish or aloof, it's consider. I mean, it just might be somebody that you don't want to hang out with, but also consider the possibility that they might be lonely.
Right.
And, that piece of research also shows that these are those unconscious behaviors that our biology makes us enact in that moment of loneliness. But deep down, that person is really longing for connection. They really, really want to connect with others. They just simply don't know how in that moment. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to enact our empathy and compassion.
Parneet, thank you. Thank you for our first human episode. Thank you for making it the most beautiful and interesting and absolutely awesome. It was seriously so good to have you on here.
Thank you so much, Beth. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like, I found a new friend. And thanks so much for having this conversation and for helping me share these ideas.
To learn more about Parneet and her work, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and you could do us a favor, please rate, review, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Really helps people find the show. If you would like to support Species Unite, we would greatly appreciate it. Go to our website, speciesunite.com, and click donate. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knudsen, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polke, Ayana Peoples, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.